When Karen knocked on my door with a $5,000 0-cent fine for illegal hunting, I just smiled. What she didn't know was that little piece of paper set off a chain of events that would leave the entire HOA in tears. They thought they controlled every inch of this neighborhood. But there's one thing they don't control: property law. And once I started digging into those so-called community trails they hike every morning, I uncovered a secret that could flip the whole game. If you've ever dreamed of teaching an HOA a lesson about private property rights, this story's for you. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop a comment. I'd love to see how strong our community really is. I never planned on becoming the neighborhood villain. 2 years ago, when I moved to Green Valley Estates, I was simply looking for peace and quiet. After 8 years in the military and another 5 working in cramped tech offices in Seattle, I craved space. Lots of it. My name's Mason Holloway, 38 years old, and I work remotely as a software engineer for a cybersecurity firm. The job pays well, gives me flexibility, and most importantly, allowed me to escape the city for this quiet suburb nestled against beautiful woodland in western Washington. Green Valley Estates seemed perfect on paper. Modern homes on spacious lots, backed by miles of forest, and just remote enough to feel peaceful without being isolated. The HOA fees were steep, $450 quarterly, but the listing agent assured me it was worth it for the immaculately maintained community spaces and award-winning landscaping. What she conveniently failed to mention was that the Green Valley Estates Association was run by Evelyn Richardson, quite possibly the most controlling 38-year-old to ever wield a rule book. I first met Evelyn during my second week in the neighborhood, when she appeared at my door with a welcome basket that contained more HOA bylaws than actual welcome gifts. "We're so delighted to have new blood in Green Valley," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure you'll love our community once you understand how we operate." That should have been my first warning. Evelyn, with her perfect bob haircut and designer casual wear, was a senior manager at a prestigious law firm and had been the HOA president for 5 years running. Unopposed elections, I would later learn, because no one dared challenge her. The first few months, I kept to myself. I paid my dues on time, maintained my lawn according to regulation, and avoided the monthly HOA meetings that, from what I gathered from my neighbor Sarah Johnson, were more like Evelyn's personal court sessions than actual community discussions. Sarah was one of the few genuinely friendly faces in the neighborhood. A 35-year-old elementary school teacher who lived 2 doors down and occasionally brought over homemade cookies just to be nice. "Don't let Evelyn get to you," she'd advised me early on. "She means well, sometimes. She just believes her way is the only way." I might have continued flying under Evelyn's radar indefinitely if it weren't for my weekend hobby. Growing up in rural Montana, I'd been taught to hunt by my grandfather since I was old enough to hold a rifle. It wasn't just recreation, it was tradition, a connection to a simpler way of life, and honestly, I enjoyed the quiet focus it required. One weekend in October, I discovered a large tract of wooded land adjoining our community, about 80 acres of pristine forest with a stream running through it. I spent a Saturday exploring it, and it looked perfect for deer hunting season, which was approaching. Curious about ownership, I did some research at the county records office. The land belonged to an 83-year-old man named Frank Williams, who had moved to Florida years ago, but still maintained ownership. I managed to find his contact information and sent him an email, explaining that I was interested in hunting on his property and would respect the land. To my surprise, he replied the next day. "Son, I've owned that land for 50 years, he wrote. "My family used to farm the clearings. Haven't been back there in almost a decade since my arthritis got bad. If you want to hunt there, you have my permission. Just be respectful and send me a picture if you get a nice buck." What I didn't realize at the time was that for years, Evelyn and several other HOA members had been using Frank's land for their morning hiking routine. They'd created unofficial trails, placed little benches at scenic spots, and even installed bird feeders, all without the actual owner's knowledge or permission. They had essentially claimed the land as their own private nature reserve, despite having no legal right to it. This detail would become important very soon. On a crisp November morning, I headed out before dawn with my rifle and hunting gear. I positioned myself in a clearing that Frank had mentioned was a good spot, waiting patiently as the sun rose. Around 9 in the morning, luck was with me. A healthy 8-point buck appeared at the edge of the clearing. I took the shot cleanly, and the deer went down instantly. As I approached to field dress it, I heard voices coming down one of the trails. Through the trees emerged Evelyn, leading a group of 5 women in expensive athleisure wear, all carrying water bottles and chatting about neighborhood gossip. The moment Evelyn spotted me kneeling beside the deer, her face transformed with horror. "What in God's name are you doing?" she shrieked, fumbling for her phone. "This is a protected area. Who gave you permission to murder animals here?" Before I could explain, she was snapping photos and threatening to call the authorities. "This is absolutely barbaric," she announced to her wide-eyed companions, "and completely against Green Valley's commitment to environmental stewardship." I tried to explain that I had the owner's permission, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave. "We manage these nature trails," she insisted, "and hunting is absolutely prohibited." But what happened next made me realize that the HOA didn't just want to control the color of my mailbox. They wanted to control my entire life. 3 days after my encounter with Evelyn in the woods, I found an official-looking envelope stuck to my front door. Inside was a notice of violation from the Green Valley Estates Association, citing me for cruel hunting activities causing community disturbance, and demanding a fine of $5,000, to be paid within 30 days. My first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by anger. I knew enough about HOA regulations to understand they had no jurisdiction over activities conducted outside HOA property, especially on private land, where I had explicit permission from the owner. I called Sarah immediately, who sighed heavily when I told her about the fine. "That sounds like Evelyn. She's been talking about this at the school where I teach, making you sound like some kind of serial killer. Several parents are worried there's a dangerous element in the neighborhood now." Sarah lowered her voice, even though we were on the phone. "Look, Evelyn's been leading her Green Valley wellness walks through those woods for years. She uses it as a selling point when new people move in. Exclusive access to private nature trails. I don't think she's ever bothered to check who actually owns the land." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following evening, and I decided to attend and challenge the fine. When I arrived at the community center, the small meeting room was unusually full. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, flanked by Marcus Bennett, the 42-year-old vice president who worked for the local government and functioned primarily as Evelyn's yes man. Richard Cooper, the 55-year-old HOA treasurer, sat to her right, looking uncomfortable. I recognized several other neighbors, including Jessica Parker, a 40-year-old woman known for reporting even the most minor HOA violations with zealous enthusiasm. "Ah, Mr. Holloway has decided to join us," Evelyn announced as I took a seat near the back. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to the community why you feel it's appropriate to engage in violent activities in our neighborhood nature preserve?" The way she framed the question made it clear this was a public shaming, not a discussion. I stood up, holding a folder of documentation I'd prepared. "I'd be happy to clarify a few things," I said calmly. "First, I was hunting legally with a valid permit on private property with the owner's explicit written permission. Second, the land in question is not HOA property, nor is it a neighborhood nature preserve. It's privately owned by a man named Frank Williams who lives in Florida." I placed copies of my hunting license and Frank's email on the table. Furthermore, the HOA has no jurisdiction to issue fines for activities conducted outside HOA boundaries. I've reviewed our bylaws thoroughly, and there's nothing that gives the association this authority. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Richard Cooper picked up the documents, studying them with a frown. "He seems to have a point about jurisdiction, Evelyn," he said cautiously. "If this occurred outside our property lines—" Evelyn cut him off sharply. "That's where you're mistaken, Mason. Those trails have been part of our community resources for over a decade. We've maintained them, improved them, and our residents have enjoyed them as part of their Green Valley experience. Whether some absentee owner is technically on a deed is irrelevant after so many years of established use." Marcus nodded vigorously in agreement, adding, "Plus, the presence of firearms so close to our homes represents a serious safety concern for all residents, especially children." The debate grew heated, with several residents voicing concerns about safety and property values, clearly parroting talking points they'd heard from Evelyn before the meeting. Jessica Parker stood up and dramatically declared, "I moved here because it was peaceful and safe. Now I'm afraid to let my children play in our yard knowing there are armed men prowling the woods." I tried to interject that hunting season was limited and that I always followed strict safety protocols, but the narrative had already been established. Eventually, Evelyn called Officer Mike Davis, a 45-year-old local police officer who happened to live in the community. When he arrived, he reviewed my hunting license and confirmed that I had been acting within the law. "As far as hunting regulations go, he's in compliance," Officer Davis explained, "and if he has permission from the landowner, there's no trespassing issue. This would be a civil matter between the HOA and the property owner." This should have ended the discussion, but Evelyn was undeterred. "This isn't about legality, Mike. It's about community standards and the safety of our residents," she insisted. "The HOA board has the authority to enforce those standards, and the fine stands." As the meeting concluded, Evelyn fixed me with a steely gaze. "You have 30 days to pay the fine, Mr. Holloway. If you refuse, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property and pursue legal action." I stood my ground. "I won't be paying a fine that has no legal basis," I replied, "and I suggest the board consult with an actual real estate attorney before making threats." On my way out, I noticed a brochure on the information table titled Green Valley Trails map. I picked it up and was shocked to see Frank's entire property clearly marked as Green Valley Nature Trails, with no mention that it was private land. That night, I called Frank Williams again to update him on the situation. He sounded tired and frustrated. I had no idea they were using my land like that, he said. I've never given anyone permission to build trails or install benches. The property taxes keep going up, and I've been thinking about selling anyway. My medical bills are piling up and I could use the cash. A thought began to form in my mind. Frank, I asked casually, if you're serious about selling, I might be interested in buying. What price would you consider? As we discussed the details, I realized I might have found the perfect way to turn the tables on Evelyn and her HOA. That night, as I researched property ownership laws, I discovered something that made me gasp. The HOA wasn't just using the land without permission, they were actively planning to transform it into an Evelyn Richardson nature park without any consent from the actual owner. The discovery of the park plans changed everything. While digging through public records, I found permit applications filed by the HOA for preliminary development of a community nature park on Frank's land. They'd submitted environmental surveys, applied for grants, and even held fundraisers, all for a project on land they didn't own. Attached to the applications were architects' renderings showing walking paths, picnic areas, and at the entrance, a stone sign declaring Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, a Green Valley legacy. The audacity was breathtaking. The next morning, I contacted Amanda Lewis, a 40-year-old real estate attorney recommended by a colleague. She reviewed the documents I had collected and raised her eyebrows. This is unusual, she said diplomatically. The HOA has essentially attempted to claim adverse possession of the land, but they haven't met the requirements. In Washington state, they would need to have used the land openly, notoriously, and without permission for at least 10 years, and they would need to pay the property taxes, which clearly Mr. Williams has been handling. Furthermore, their plans to develop the property go well beyond casual use. This is a clear overreach. When I told her I was considering purchasing the land myself, she smiled. That would certainly be an interesting solution. Let me help you make sure everything is above board. Over the next few days, a strange campaign began in the neighborhood. My garbage cans would mysteriously remain at the curb after collection. Anonymous notes appeared on my windshield warning me that animal killers aren't welcome in Green Valley. Several neighbors who had previously been friendly suddenly became distant. Sarah told me she'd overheard Evelyn at a school function warning parents to keep their children away from that dangerous man on Maple Street. The message was clear: conform or be ostracized. While this social pressure campaign unfolded, I was quietly working with Frank Williams and Amanda Lewis to negotiate the purchase of the 80 acres. Frank initially asked for $800,000, but given his eagerness to sell and the property's remote location, we eventually settled on $750,000. It was a steep price, nearly my entire savings and a chunk of an inheritance from my grandparents, but I considered it an investment in both real estate and peace of mind. Amanda expedited the paperwork and we scheduled the closing for the following week. During this time, I received 3 more notices from the HOA. One for improper garbage can storage, another for unauthorized vehicle parking, my own truck, in my own driveway because I'd left it there for more than 24 hours while on a business trip, and a third reminder about the hunting violation fine, now with added late fees. I filed each one away, following Amanda's advice to document everything, but not engage until we'd completed the land purchase. Sarah continued to be my eyes and ears in the community. Evelyn's holding private meetings with certain homeowners, she reported one evening. They're planning some big announcement about a new community project. There's a fundraising event next month. Very exclusive, minimum donation of $1,000. She's been particularly friendly with Daniel Thompson from the city council. I think she's securing permits or approvals for something. Daniel Thompson was a 50-year-old local politician known for supporting development projects, and his connection to Evelyn raised further concerns about what they were planning for Frank's land. I also noticed Trevor Adams, Evelyn's 39-year-old husband and an architectural consultant, surveying the property with measuring equipment one afternoon. When he spotted me watching from the edge of the woods, he quickly packed up and left without acknowledging me. His company, Green Vision Consulting, was listed on the park development applications as the primary design firm for the project. Everything pointed to a well-orchestrated plan to essentially appropriate Frank's land for the HOA's purposes, and specifically for Evelyn's ego-driven vanity project. By the end of the week, I received another visit from Evelyn and Marcus. This time they brought a formal notice of intent to sue if I didn't pay the accumulated fines, now totaling $5,700 with late fees. "This is your final warning, Mason," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "We don't want to take legal action, but the community standards must be upheld." Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to look intimidating, but mainly succeeding at looking uncomfortable. The board has unanimously approved pursuing legal remedies if you continue to refuse cooperation, he added. I nodded politely. I understand. You'll have my response within 48 hours. Evelyn seemed surprised by my sudden agreeableness, but recovered quickly. I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, she said with a satisfied smile. Perhaps you're beginning to understand how we do things in Green Valley. If only she knew what was coming. The very next day, I completed the purchase of Frank's 80 acres. Amanda expedited the final paperwork, and by that afternoon, I held in my hands the deed to the property that Evelyn had been treating as her personal domain for years. That night, I could hardly sleep, knowing that when Evelyn knocked on my door the next morning with her lawsuit in hand, I had in my pocket something that would leave the entire HOA stunned in disbelief. At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, right on schedule, my doorbell rang. Evelyn stood on my porch, immaculately dressed in a blue blazer and white pants, her hair perfectly styled despite the light drizzle. Marcus Bennett hovered behind her, clutching a leather portfolio that presumably contained their legal threats. "Good morning, Mason," Evelyn said crisply. "I assume you've had time to reconsider your position on the HOA violation." Her tone suggested she expected full capitulation, her head tilted slightly in that condescending way that had become her trademark. I smiled broadly, stepping aside to invite them in. "Actually, I have something important to discuss with both of you. Please, come into the living room." Confused by my friendly demeanor but unwilling to show it, Evelyn strode in, with Marcus trailing behind. Once seated, she immediately took control. "Before you begin whatever explanation you've prepared, I should inform you that we've filed paperwork with the county court regarding your violation," she added with practiced magnanimity. "If you're prepared to pay the full amount today, we can still withdraw the filing before it progresses further." "That's very interesting," I replied, maintaining my calm. "But I think you'll want to see this first." I slid a folder across the coffee table. Inside was a copy of the deed to Frank Williams' 80 acres, now bearing my name as the legal owner, along with a survey map clearly showing the boundaries. As of yesterday afternoon, I am the sole owner of the property where the alleged hunting violation occurred. Furthermore, I'm also now the owner of all the land where the Green Valley HOA has been illegally creating trails, installing benches, and planning to build a park without the previous owner's permission. The color drained from Evelyn's face. She snatched up the documents, flipping through them frantically while Marcus peered over her shoulder, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. This can't be right," she stammered. "The community has been using those trails for over a decade. We have established rights." "Adverse possession?" I interrupted. "My attorney assures me you don't qualify. You never paid the property taxes, never had explicit or implicit permission from the owner, and Mr. Williams was never notified of your intentions to develop his land." I leaned forward. "In fact, I have documentation showing that the HOA deliberately avoided contacting the legal owner while planning substantial development on his property. That raises serious legal questions about fraud and misrepresentation, especially considering the fundraising you've done for this project." Marcus began to look physically ill, tugging at his collar. "Evelyn, perhaps we should consult with legal counsel before—" She silenced him with a glare. "This changes nothing," she insisted, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The community has established usage rights through years of maintenance and improvement of the trails. The courts will recognize—" "Feel free to pursue that argument in court," I replied evenly. "In the meantime, as the legal owner, I'm formally notifying you that all HOA activities on my property must cease immediately. Any trails, benches, bird feeders, or other installations are there without my permission and must be removed within 7 days. Further," I added, sliding another document toward them, "this is a cease and desist letter from my attorney regarding the fraudulent park development plans. All fundraising and permit applications must be withdrawn immediately." Evelyn stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed. "I've built this community from nothing. Everyone respects my vision. One outsider with a deed won't change that. The HOA board stands behind me completely." I remained seated, maintaining eye contact. "That may be true, but the law stands behind me, and unlike HOA rules, actual property law is enforceable by authorities beyond your control." After they left, Evelyn storming out, Marcus scurrying after her, I watched through the window as they hurried across the street to the home of Jessica Parker, no doubt to begin damage control. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with text messages from Sarah. "Emergency HOA meeting called for 7 p.m. tonight. Everyone's talking about you buying the hiking land. Evelyn is furious." By afternoon, I had ordered "parking land, no property, no trespassing" signs to be installed around the perimeter of my new land and hired a contractor to begin placing them the next day. As I prepared to attend the emergency meeting, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Emily Chen, a 39-year-old reporter from the local newspaper. Mr. Holloway, I'm Emily Chen from the Valley Chronicle. We've received some interesting tips about a dispute between you and the Green Valley HOA. Would you care to comment? Her directness was refreshing after months of passive-aggressive neighborhood politics. I invited her in, explaining the situation while carefully avoiding any comments that could be considered defamatory. Emily took detailed notes, her eyes widening at certain revelations. So, you purchased the land legally, and the HOA had been using it without permission all this time? And they were planning to build a park named after their president without consulting the owner? She shook her head in disbelief. This will make quite a story. Just before I left for the meeting, an elderly man approached my house cautiously. He introduced himself as Robert Jackson, a 65-year-old retired accountant who had lived in Green Valley for over 20 years. I need to speak with you privately, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder, about Evelyn and that land you bought. Inside, Robert revealed that he had served on the HOA board years ago, when they first discovered the land was privately owned. Evelyn directed us to forget about finding the owner, he confessed. She said it would complicate things and that adverse possession would take care of it eventually. I resigned from the board over it, told her it wasn't ethical, but she's been running things her way ever since. Robert also hinted at financial irregularities in how the HOA had been handling funds for the proposed park. They've been collecting special assessments for 3 years for the Trail Improvement Fund, substantial amounts, but the financial reports don't fully account for all the money. When I asked questions at a meeting last year, I was told the detailed accounting was confidential due to ongoing negotiations. This new information was a bombshell. What Robert was describing went beyond HOA overreach. It suggested potential financial misconduct. As I thanked him for coming forward, he gripped my arm anxiously. Be careful, Evelyn doesn't lose gracefully. She and her husband have a lot of connections in this town. The revelations from Robert didn't just give me a stronger legal position, they provided me with a weapon that could potentially end Evelyn's reign over Green Valley Estates for good. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was exactly the circus I expected. The community center was packed with residents, many of whom I'd barely exchanged words with in the 2 years I'd lived there. Evelyn stood at the front, her composure restored, though a tightness around her eyes betrayed her anger. We've called this special meeting to address a situation that affects our entire community, she began. Mr. Holloway has purchased the land adjacent to our neighborhood, land that has served as our nature trails for over a decade. He is now threatening to cut off access and destroy years of community improvement work. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Evelyn continued her carefully crafted narrative, painting me as an outsider who didn't understand community values, a selfish individual, putting personal interests above the collective good. Marcus stood beside her, nodding earnestly at every point. When she finished her speech, she turned the floor over to Trevor Adams, her husband, who unveiled glossy renderings of the proposed Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, complete with walking paths, a playground, and a small amphitheater for community events. All of this is now at risk, he concluded solemnly. Years of planning and fundraising potentially wasted because one person refuses to embrace our community vision. When I was finally allowed to speak, the atmosphere was decidedly hostile. I appreciate everyone's concern, I began, keeping my voice level, but there are some facts you should be aware of. First, this land has always been private property. The previous owner was never contacted by the HOA before trails were built or benches installed. Second, the park plans unveiled tonight were developed without any legal right to the property. And third, most importantly, the fundraising done for this project was conducted under false pretenses, since the HOA never had any legal claim to the land. The room erupted in a mix of outrage and confusion. Some residents shouted questions about their donations, while others accused me of destroying community amenities. Through the chaos, I noticed Nancy Roberts, the 42-year-old HOA secretary, watching the proceedings with an odd expression. Not anger, but something closer to fear. She avoided eye contact when I looked her way. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, also seemed uncomfortable, shuffling papers and whispering urgently to Marcus. After the meeting dissolved into arguing factions, Sarah approached me as I was leaving. "That was intense," she whispered. "But you've got people talking. Some of the older residents are asking questions about the fundraising. No one seems to know exactly how much was collected or where it all went." She glanced around nervously. "Listen, I think Nancy knows something. She's been acting strange ever since the park project began. Maybe try talking to her?" Over the next 3 days, I watched as my property signs were installed around the perimeter of my new land. By the second day, half of them had been removed or vandalized, exactly as I'd anticipated. I'd installed trail cameras at key points, which captured clear images of Marcus Bennett and several other HOA members trespassing to remove the signs in the middle of the night. These images would prove useful later, but for now, I was more interested in the financial angle Robert had hinted at. Working with Amanda Lewis, I filed public records requests for all HOA financial documents related to the Nature Park project. While waiting for those to be processed, I reached out to Nancy Roberts under the pretext of discussing the sign vandalism. She initially refused to meet, clearly frightened, but eventually agreed to talk at a coffee shop 2 towns over, where she felt safe from prying eyes. They whisper, "I can't be seen with you," she whispered when we finally met. "Evelyn has eyes everywhere." Nancy's revelation was exactly what I needed. As HOA secretary, she had access to all the financial records, including the special Nature Park Development Fund that had collected over $75,000 from residents over the past 3 years. The money goes into the fund, but then large chunks are transferred to a consulting company called Green Vision Consulting for preliminary design work and environmental assessments, she explained. The company submits invoices with vague descriptions and receives payment immediately, approved solely by Evelyn, bypassing the normal board approval process for large expenditures. "And who owns Green Vision Consulting?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Nancy confirmed it. "Trevor Adams, Evelyn's husband. And there's another partner, Patricia Bennett, Marcus's sister. It's all kept very quiet. The contracts were awarded without competitive bidding, justified as specialized services exempt from the normal procurement policy." Nancy slid a flash drive across the table. "I've been making copies of everything." I wanted to speak up, but Evelyn made it clear my job at the school district could be at risk if I caused problems. Her law firm represents the district, and she's friends with the superintendent. Armed with this evidence, I contacted Detective Alex Morgan, a 40-year-old investigator with the county sheriff's office who specialized in financial crimes. After reviewing the documents, he agreed there were sufficient grounds for a preliminary investigation into potential embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. "This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore," he explained. "If they've been soliciting donations for a project on land they knew they didn't own, and then diverting those funds to a company owned by the board president's family, that crosses several legal lines." While the investigation began quietly, Evelyn escalated her campaign against me. A small group of protesters appeared outside my house one morning, carrying signs reading, "Save Our Trails" and "Community Over Selfishness." Local social media groups filled with posts questioning my character and intentions. More disturbingly, Sarah called to warn me that she'd been approached by the school principal, who expressed concerns about her friendship with the controversial new resident and hinted that her upcoming contract renewal might be affected. Emily Chen's article about the dispute appeared in the Valley Chronicle, presenting a relatively balanced view of the situation, but raising pointed questions about the park fundraising and the HOA's authority. The day after it was published, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney threatening to sue me for defamation and demanding $100,000 in damages for harming the reputation of the Green Valley Estates Association and its officer. The letter specifically mentioned the financial allegations, claiming they were malicious fabrications intended to distract from Holloway's own violations. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Detective Morgan. "We've obtained preliminary bank records," he said without preamble. "In the past 3 years, Green Vision Consulting has received payments totaling $68,000 from the HOA's special fund. The company has only one client, the HOA, and has issued invoices for services that would typically cost about 1/3 of what was charged. We're moving forward with the investigation, but thought you should know." At the next HOA meeting, Evelyn was visibly tense, but doubling down on her narrative. "We will not be intimidated by baseless accusations," she declared to the assembled residents. "Mr. Holloway is attempting to deflect attention from his own violations by smearing the reputation of those who have selflessly served this community. Rest assured, the board will defend itself vigorously against these attacks." As she spoke, I noticed several residents exchanging skeptical glances. The facade was beginning to crack. Evelyn must have sensed it too, because she abruptly shifted tactics, fixing me with a cold stare from across the room. "You've made a serious mistake, Mason. When this is over, I promise you won't just lose this battle, you'll regret ever moving to Green Valley. I will personally make sure of it." Her threat, made publicly in front of dozens of witnesses, was the final piece I needed. As I left the meeting, I knew it was time to stop playing defense and launch my counterattack. What Evelyn didn't know was that in 24 hours, it wouldn't be me facing devastating consequences, it would be her. The next morning, I called Emily Chen and invited her to my home for an exclusive interview. When she arrived, I presented her with copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. The financial records showing payments to Green Vision Consulting, the incorporation documents for the company showing its ownership by Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett, the fundraising materials that misrepresented the HOA's right to develop the land, and statements from both Frank Williams and Robert Jackson confirming the HOA had deliberately avoided contacting the legal owner. I also included the audio recording of Evelyn's threat from the previous night's meeting, along with witness statements from residents who had heard it. "This is extensive," Emily said, eyes widening as she reviewed the documents. "And you're saying Detective Morgan is already investigating?" I nodded. "He's been very professional, treating this as a potential financial crimes case rather than a neighborhood dispute. I believe he's interviewing other board members today." Emily's article would appear in the next day's paper, but she promised to publish an online preview that evening. Perfect timing for the special HOA meeting Evelyn had called to discuss legal strategies against defamatory statements. While Emily worked on her story, I implemented the next phase of my plan. With Amanda's help, I drafted a formal letter to every Green Valley resident, providing documentation of the financial irregularities and explaining exactly how their donations had been misused. I included copies of the trail camera photos showing HOA board members vandalizing my property signs, along with a detailed accounting of how much had been collected for the park fund versus how much had been paid to Green Vision Consulting. The letter concluded with a proposal. I would establish a legitimate community trail on a portion of my land, properly maintained and insured, if the current HOA leadership resigned and new transparent financial controls were implemented. By late afternoon, news had spread that Detective Morgan had been seen at the homes of Richard Cooper and Nancy Roberts, presumably taking official statements. Several residents reported receiving calls from Evelyn urging them to attend the evening's meeting to show solidarity against baseless attacks on our community. But her support was crumbling rapidly. John Peterson, a 70-year-old retired banker who had donated $5,000 to the park fund, was calling other residents, expressing his outrage at how the money had been handled. Cynthia Miller, one of Evelyn's former allies on the HOA board, publicly announced she was requesting a full audit of all association funds. The special meeting that evening was unlike any other in Green Valley's history. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling out into the parking lot. Evelyn arrived with Trevor and Marcus, all three looking tense but determined. She attempted to call the meeting to order, but was immediately interrupted by shouts and questions from the crowd. "Is it true you've been funneling HOA money to your husband's company?" someone called out. "Why didn't you tell us the land wasn't ours to develop?" demanded another. In all caps, Evelyn tried to regain control, her voice rising above the din. "These are all malicious fabrications. Mason Holloway is attempting to manipulate this community for his own purposes. Yes, Green Vision Consulting has provided services to the HOA, all properly documented and approved by the board. The fact that Trevor happens to be a principal in the company doesn't change the quality of work provided." This only prompted more questions and objections. "But you didn't disclose the conflict of interest," shouted Richard Cooper, surprising everyone by breaking ranks. "I signed off on those payments because you assured me everything was above board." As the meeting descended into chaos, District Attorney William Hayes unexpectedly arrived, accompanied by Detective Morgan. They stood quietly at the back of the room, observing. Their presence did not go unnoticed by Evelyn, whose composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, slamming her hand on the podium. "Everything I've done has been for this community. If I've bent a few procedural rules, it was only to ensure our beautiful park would become a reality. Would you rather have some gun-toting outsider control our access to nature?" Her outburst silenced the room momentarily, but then Nancy Roberts stood up from her seat in the corner. "That's not true, Evelyn, and you know it," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "You deliberately concealed information about the land ownership. You pressured the board to approve payments to Trevor's company without proper review. You threatened my job when I questioned the invoices. This wasn't about the community. It was about building a monument to yourself with other people's money." The meeting erupted again, with multiple residents demanding Evelyn's resignation. Marcus attempted to defend her, but his heart wasn't in it. Trevor remained silent, his face pale as he watched his wife's carefully constructed empire crumbling. District Attorney Hayes approached the podium and gently but firmly asked Evelyn to step aside. "In light of the ongoing investigation," he announced to the room, "I would suggest the association consider temporary leadership until this matter is resolved." Evelyn refused to surrender gracefully. "I will not be stepping down," she declared, glaring defiantly at the crowd. "These accusations are defamatory, and anyone repeating them will be named in our lawsuit. This community needs strong leadership, now more than ever, and I will not abandon my responsibilities because of one disgruntled resident's vendetta." With that, she gathered her things and strode out, Trevor and Marcus hurrying after her. As the residents dispersed, many approached me with questions, apologies, and expressions of support. Sarah, who had been documenting the meeting with her phone, gave me a thumbs up from across the room. Emily Chen, who had slipped in during the commotion, was busily interviewing residents for her follow-up story. District Attorney Hayes and Detective Morgan asked if I could come to the sheriff's office the next morning to provide an official statement. "This has moved beyond an HOA dispute," Hayes explained quietly. "The evidence suggests potential wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and abuse of position. We're taking it seriously." That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Storage unit at Valley Self-Storage, Unit 23, getting emptied tonight. Documents being moved. Thought you should know." I immediately called Detective Morgan, who thanked me for the tip and promised to look into it. The next morning, I learned that officers had intercepted Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett removing boxes of financial records from the storage unit, a desperate last attempt to destroy evidence that only served to strengthen the case against them. Evelyn might have threatened to ruin my life, but it was her own life that was now falling apart, and entirely by her own hand. But she still had one last desperate move to play, and I needed to be ready for it. 2 days later, Evelyn made her last move. Through social media and email, she announced a community trail preservation walk. Basically, a mass trespass on my land set for Saturday morning. "Join your neighbors in reclaiming our beloved trails," it read. "Bring kids, grandparents, cameras. Show Mason Holloway he can't steal what's ours." It was a clear stunt to paint me as the villain. One man blocking families from their land. I saw this coming and was ready. First, I alerted Detective Morgan in the sheriff's office. Then, working with Amanda Lewis, I legally marked most of my land as a private wildlife reserve with permits and tax benefits. I built a sturdier fence, clear signs showing conservation status, and trespassing penalties. I also added a legal entry gate with an info kiosk detailing the property's designation. Saturday morning, I stood at the gate with a camera, Amanda beside me. Evelyn showed up on cue, leading 30 people waving signs like "Trails for All." She wore brand new hiking gear and carried a stick she clearly never used before. She hesitated at the fence, but quickly put on a show. "This is outrageous," she declared for the cameras. "We've used these trails for decades. These fences are illegal, and we're here to take back our rights." She moved toward the gate, but before she touched it, 3 patrol cars rolled up. Deputies stepped out, led by Detective Morgan. "Morning," Morgan told the group. "This land is private. The owner has reported past trespassing and vandalism. Anyone crossing this line can be arrested." He looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Richardson, organizing this mass entry may be used as further evidence in your case." Evelyn's face turned red. "This is absurd. Tell them, Marcus." But Marcus backed away, not eager to clash with the law. Others followed, heading to their cars as the threat of arrest cooled Evelyn's crowd. "You're all giving up?" she cried. "After everything I've done?" That line, "everything I've done," sounded different now, knowing the truth. Her crowd thinned to a few diehards, who also left after firm but polite pressure from deputies. As she walked to her car, Evelyn shot me a hateful glare. "This isn't over," she hissed, but her threat rang empty now, stripped of power. The next week was a flood of developments, with evidence from Nancy Roberts and Richard Cooper and files from the storage unit. The DDA charged Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia with fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of HOA funds. Over $68,000, 0 cents, had been taken to fund vacations and renovations. The HOA board was disbanded by emergency vote. Sarah Johnson was elected interim president. Her first move was a full audit and new rules for financial transparency. The rest of the board apologized to me and the community for letting Evelyn go unchecked. Richard Cooper resigned, admitting he never verified Evelyn's directives. Meanwhile, I kept my word. I built a real public trail on part of my land, with proper permits and planning. I named it the Frank Williams Memorial Trail, after the original owner. A plaque told his story and reminded visitors to respect both nature and ownership. Evelyn and her crew took plea deals to avoid trial. Each got probation, suspended sentences, and had to repay over $100,000, 0 cents. They were banned from managing nonprofits or HOAs for 10 years. A month later, they sold their house and quietly left Green Valley, reputations ruined. The last HOA meeting I attended felt different. Under Sarah, the focus was on community, not power game. When we voted on a new access agreement to my land, with insurance and conservation guidelines, it passed unanimously. "This is what real community looks like," Sarah said. Walking home, I thought back on everything. I still hunt on my land, now with full support from neighbors. The HOA still exists, but now works for people, not against them. And the $75,000, 0 cents Evelyn paid back? At my suggestion, it became a scholarship fund for students studying ethics and leadership. Sometimes losing something shows its real worth. The HOA lost access and found honesty. Me? I gained something far better, a true community. And Evelyn? Last I heard, she's in an apartment with no HOA at all. Fitting.